After winning 4 straight championships, it's not hard to understand why Jimmie Johnson will be a fan favorite to take home this year's title. But it is a new year, and we certainly have a different crop of hopefuls. So for each week of the chase, we thought it'd be a good idea to welcome in an expert. This week in our cover story, we're joined by the host of the syndicated radio show TMS Total Access and PRN pit reporter Brad Gillie, who will help us better understand who has a shot of breaking Jimmie Johnson's reign. Brad, welcome to the show. And first, let's start off with the chase field. Are you surprised at who made it this season, or were there any drivers that you were surprised didn't make the field?
You know, honestly, I'm never surprised at who does make it, because in today's NASCAR, there is so many competitive cars out on the racetrack week in and week out that I could make a case for 25 drivers that could end up in the top 12 by the time we get to race number 26. Now, some of the ones that surprised me that didn't make it, honestly, might be a guy like Jamie McMurray. I mean, here's a guy that has won the 2 biggest races of the year, the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400, and he's not contending for the championship. I would love to see NASCAR put some sort of wild card in, maybe next year, where, you know, if you win so many races, that automatically gets you into the chase. But maybe McMurray surprises me that he didn't get in. Mark Martin finished second last year in the final standings. He's a surprise. Casey Kane and, you know, a handful of other drivers. But again, the ones who did make it never surprised me.
Wins certainly helped push Denny Hamlin up to the top, but consistency is so often the key. Who do you think has the steady hand to make it through without having the dreaded DNF?
You know, I mean, this is where you can't help but make a case for Jimmie Johnson. His career in the 6 years of the chase is incredible. 75% of his chase finishes have been in the top 10. More than 50% of them have been in the top 5, and he's averaged 3 wins per year in every single chase year. Now, Denny Hamlin, I would love to say the consistency is there for him, but last year he had 3 DNFs during the chase due to either an engine failure or a crash. In the last 5 races preceding this chase, Hamlin's already had 2 DNFs because of 1 engine failure and 1 crash. I don't know that he's got the consistency. I think you got to look to Jimmie Johnson. You have to look to the history and what they've been able to do and say he's easily the most consistent when it comes to the final 10.
Well, Jeff Burton, Jeff Gordon, even Tony Stewart, these are all not what we would call fresh faces. Now, should we be surprised by the veteran presence, and how much could their experience be a factor?
You know, I don't think we should ever be surprised by a veteran experience. They're veterans for a reason. They're still in the sport for a reason. They're contending for championships for a reason, and that's because they have experience. So no surprise that they're into the chase. They know how to points race. They know what they've got to do, when to give, when to take, week in and week out to be able to make it into this top 12. Here's the big difference. Experience in the chase. Jimmie Johnson has that experience. He knows when to go. Jimmie races the chase races like he races every other week. What I worry about some of these other veterans, like a Jeff Gordon, who's been trying this chase thing for a few years now, is that they might try something different. They might try and be too conservative and whatnot. So I think sometimes that experience can hurt them just a little bit, but I do think just the fact that they do have a lot of years under their belt, they know how to race, they know how to keep their car clean, is going to help them out in a big way in this final 10.
We mentioned in our preview that of the Chase 12, only Matt Kenseth and Carl Edwards have not won at New Hampshire. Does starting at that track put them at a disadvantage?
No, not at all. In fact, the only chase champion that has ever won at New Hampshire, the first race of the chase, is Kurt Busch, and that was back in 2004. Jimmie Johnson has never won this New Hampshire race, although he did win earlier this season back in June at the track. So not having a win at this particular track doesn't worry me at all for either Kenseth or Carl Edwards. In fact, Carl Edwards, what I look at him going into this chase is the fact that he's got a lot of momentum built up. He has been the best driver over the past 10 races. Now he's on the upswing. A win is right around the corner for him. So the fact that he's not won New Hampshire and the fact that anybody else has won New Hampshire, I don't think has any bearing on what we're going to see when we get to Homestead in the finale.
Well, for a few years now, we've heard about a chase strategy. It'd be easy to point at Jimmie Johnson and just say, do what he does, and I'm sure some have tried. Have you seen any trends or strategies develop for a successful chase campaign?
Yeah, Jimmie's strategy of continuing to race every single week just like he races. It doesn't matter whether it's the chase or the regular season. Here's an interesting thing. I was up on the stage at Richmond last week when the drivers, were doing their post interviews, the ones in the top 12. Jeff Gordon said, you're in this chase, you got to be a little careful sometimes. I don't know that I'm going to take a third place car and go for a race win and run the risk of wrecking myself, because the penalty for finishing bad is far greater than the advantage for winning a race. So Jeff has that in the back of his mind. I then asked his teammate Jimmie Johnson, here's what Jeff said. Here's what other drivers have said. How do you feel? And Jimmie said, no, we don't want to do anything different. Why would we do anything different? In fact, Jimmie even pointed back to 2007 at Texas Motor Speedway when he could have easily taken a second place finish, but instead for about 30 laps he worked and worked and worked and beat on Matt Kenseth and finally ended up winning the race. A lot of people thought he was crazy for doing it, but that's the way he wins championships, because he goes after it every single week and doesn't hold back anything.
Finally, who do you like to get things started off with a win in the chase at New Hampshire, or is there someone outside the chase that we should look for?
Well, I think who you've got to look for, there's no question that someone would love to send a message in New Hampshire that, hey, I'm the guy that you can contend with this year. Mark Martin has won this first race before. Greg Biffle has won this first race. Kurt Busch has won this first race of the year he won the championship. But I think the ones that really need a win, the ones that need to not only make a statement to the rest of the chase field, but also to themselves, are the drivers that have yet to win this year. Jeff Gordon, Carl Edwards, Matt Kenseth, some of these other drivers, they need to go out there and get to victory lane, not to show everyone else that they can do it, but to show themselves they can do it and give themselves that confidence boost as we move on through the chase.
Well, Brad, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you back here next week.
All right, sounds great. Thanks a lot.
And for those of you tuning in to listen to the race on the radio this weekend, be sure to listen for Brad on PRN's presentation of the Sylvania 300. As for the latest round of stories coming out of the garage, well, we've got that covered too in this week's edition of News and Notes.